Hello, my name is Zoltan Szabo. I teach philosophy at Yale, and I'm recording this from New Haven, Connecticut. I'm going to introduce my paper, The Goal of Conversation, which is a response to Imogen Dickey's contribution. First of all, I would like to thank Imogen for this paper, which I found very thought-provoking, and it actually led me to reconsider some of the basic things, I think, about philosophy of language. I also would like to thank the organizers who must have worked very hard to bring this meeting about under the current circumstances. I'm particularly thankful to Holly de las Casas, the managing editor of the Aristotelian Society, who has been corresponding. I also would like to apologize for the awkwardness I have. I'm quite inexperienced talking to my computer alone in a room, but I hope it will work. Okay. So the background to this paper is a puzzle. While reference is front and center in any philosophical theory of language, it appears to be conspicuously absent from systematic linguistic theorizing. Reference does not play a significant role in contemporary semantics or theory of meaning. The reason is simple. Standard semantics is about truth conditions, and the only thing that constrains assignment of semantic values to subsentential expressions is the principle of compositionality. While it is true that the semantic value of proper names or personal pronouns in context is often an individual in these semantic theories, this is by no means universal. So it is not the case, for example, in either Montague's type theoretic semantics or Jacobson's variable free semantics, two very standard semantic theories. Perhaps even more surprisingly, reference doesn't seem to play a significant role in contemporary pragmatics either. Theory of conversation is focused on felicity conditions. Felicity conditions as they attach to utterances of complete sentences. An utterance is deemed infelicitous, usually, if it's not common knowledge how it's supposed to contribute towards the goal of the conversation. The goal of the conversation is supposed to be to share private knowledge on some topic of common concern. Even if the parties are ultimately interested in something else, not pooling their knowledge, for example, if sometimes they want to coordinate joint action, get better acquainted with each other, or they simply talk to avoid boredom. These goals are usually achieved, at least in part, by means of sharing some of their private knowledge. The traditional view is that this particular goal is explanatorily basic, and as it feeds into the cooperative principle, it provides the explanatory basis for accounting for felicity and infelicity. The problem Imogen's paper focuses on is called the problem of felicitous underspecification. She uses a number of examples to illustrate the problem, but can focus on one of them. So in a simple case, somebody gestures towards a package standing in a corner and utters, "This arrived yesterday." Clearly a felicitous utterance. Now, the pointing is non-specific between the package and its contents, which means that it is at least prima facie surprising that the utterance will be felicitous. After all, there is no specific proposition that's expressed, or seems like no specific proposition that is conveyed here. The natural suggestion is that reference in this case is specific enough for the goal of the conversation. Since we can assume that the package and its contents came together, it does not matter which one is being referred to. This sort of thing is very common, especially if we think with the vast majority of semanticists that sentences contain all sorts of unarticulated referring expressions. For example, you can felicitously say, yesterday was cold, without there being some contextually salient cutoff point on the temperature scale for coldness. Semantic theory will contain an element that's supposed to pick out just such a cutoff point in context. The idea is that for the purpose of the conversation, you can be specific enough, even if you fail to convey a particular proposition in these sorts of cases. The problem with this sort of explanation is that it overpredicts felicity. One of Imogen's examples involves a teacher who tells a colleague that even 1 or 2 good students can make a seminar feel worthwhile. The colleague visits her seminar, where the students actually fail to engage with the material, and then asks whether the seminar was worthwhile. The teacher responds by uttering, "She's so smart," vaguely gesturing at someone behind her colleague's back. While this is specific enough to convey an answer to the question at hand, we learn that the teacher does think that the seminar was worthwhile. It is not a felicitous utterance. Now, surprisingly, there is nothing in standard pragmatics that would explain this. This may seem like a small esoteric problem, but it is actually very significant. It shows that the combination of the cooperative principle with the traditional conception of what the goal of conversation is supposed to be is insufficient to account for infelicities, even in extremely simple and cases. It shows that the standard Grice-inspired theory has a significant hole. Imogen's diagnosis of this problem is quite natural. In her view, the standard view of the goal of conversation is actually impoverished. Participants in a conversation don't just aim at sharing private knowledge on a topic of common concern. They aim at sharing cognitive focus on objects of common concern and sharing private knowledge about those objects. When a thinking subject has an object in cognitive focus, she consciously marshals her cognitive resources to select bits and pieces from the stream of information she receives, and then organizes those into a mental file, a body of knowledge she takes to be about a single object. The subject builds this mental file by establishing a justification conferring link between herself and the object in her cognitive focus. In the simplest cases, the link is attention. On Imogen's view, the utterance of "she's so smart" in the example is infelicitous because the speaker failed to secure a shared cognitive focus on any of the students. By contrast, the utterance of "this arrived yesterday" in the other example is felicitous because there the participants can achieve a shared cognitive focus that is neutral between the package and what it contains. In my paper, I argue that this proposal has both empirical and conceptual problems. On the empirical side, the account works for the examples Imogen considers, but fails to account for certain variations of those very examples. The conceptual issues are more important. Many conversations are general or fictitious, and hence their participants are clearly not aiming at sharing cognitive focus on anything in particular. Both the empirical and conceptual problems can be fixed if we assume that mental files can be built without cognitive focus. This sort of view builds on ideas by Peter Strawson and has been developed into a full-fledged theory by Irena Heim. Of course, this moves us away from the idea that somehow the goal of conversation involves reference to particular objects. I actually reject this amended goal as well, because I think it's too parochial. Perhaps our minds are naturally inclined to structure our knowledge into bundles, and perhaps when we share our knowledge with each other, we cannot help but organize this information into such files. However, even if this is so, it remains unclear why the theory of conversation, which is pitched at an extremely high level of generality, should pay heed to this particular fact about us. It doesn't seem like this kind of organization is required if rational creatures are going to have anything like conversation. So what's my response to the problem of felicitous underspecification? Instead of a new goal, I propose we introduce into the standard theory a new norm. I call this the norm of intelligibility. The norm is simply that conversational participants should make themselves intelligible to each other. This goes beyond the requirement to ensure that one's utterances are understood in the conversation. That is already required by the standard theory. Without meeting this requirement, a conversational move could not be cooperative. Intelligibility demands that we make public some of our thinking behind the utterances we make, disclosing some of our reasons for making the utterances and some of our plans into which those utterances fit. In the paper, I use the illustration of someone who responds to a request from a friend to help move from one apartment to another, simply saying, "Sorry, I can't," or "Sure," and then start talking about something entirely different. These sorts of utterances are impeccable under the standard pragmatic theory. They resolve the question under discussion in a perfectly efficient way. Yet, I think starting a new conversation after these utterances would be infelicitous. The speaker is required to be less than optimally efficient and has to provide excess information about her reasons or plans. And this is precisely in accordance with the norm of intelligibility. Once we add this norm to the theory of conversation, the problem of felicitous underspecification dissolves. The demonstration towards the package is intelligible in Imogen's example. Without it, the speaker would not have been able to convey anything like the information she actually conveyed. By contrast, the demonstration towards a woman not visible to the addressee in the other example is not intelligible. The speaker could have said, "One of the students is so smart," but chose not to. And her demonstration served no communicative purpose whatsoever. And so my conclusion is that while the problem of felicitous underspecification does call for a revision of the standard Grice-inspired pragmatics, the revision need not bring reference into this into the theory of conversation. So despite its undeniable significance in the theory of mind, reference remains of questionable importance for the theory of meaning and conversation. Thank you.